You don't have to be rich to change the world.
Hello and welcome to The Activist Investor, a podcast about shareholder activism by TulipShare. This week, our Chief Marketing Officer Jenna was joined by sustainable fashion guru Scott Staniland. This episode was recorded in Soho Works, Shoreditch, and is available to watch online. If you hear a bit of noise in the background, that would be Rosie the dog wandering in and out of conversation. Next time we'll mic her up and get her thoughts too. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we have.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Scott. We've been very excited to have this conversation, but I thought to start, perhaps you could just give our listeners a bit of a general overview on what you do and who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Scott, or Twin Scott online, because I've got an identical twin. And I started off as a model and turned into a creator and became more vocal about sustainable fashion. And so now I see myself as more of like a sustainable fashion advocate or activist. So do lots of stuff from writing, contributing, podcasts, panel discussions, and everything in between, really.
Awesome. Yeah. So with that, we've been following you around the last couple of weeks, and you've been at quite a few fashion shows. What's the vibe on the catwalk? Are brands talking about sustainability? How's that changing?
Yeah, I suppose it's really interesting seeing it from different cities. So like doing it London Fashion Week and then Pitti in Florence because it was Men's Fashion Week, and then Milan and Paris. Even holistically over the last few years, it's become more ingrained and almost less talked about, which is good that it's now everything we do is sustainable, but here's still beautiful clothes. But even city to city at Pitti, there's like a whole spectrum of sustainable fashion brands that do tailoring, ties, socks, shoes, everything. And it's kind of housed in its own tent warehouse sort of showcase venue. But then moving to Milan and Paris, because those are like such heavy luxury fashion cities, it's kind of more ingrained in the process of what they do. So like Zegna, for example, have been fabric innovators and material textile innovators for so many years that they don't see themselves as a sustainable fashion company. They just happen to be more sustainable than a rival brand, for example. And then similarly with Paris Fashion Week, it's anecdotal in some collections. So like a designer will say, oh, by the way, it's 100% organic cotton, whereas previous seasons has been all virgin cotton, and same stuff like that. One of the highlights was probably Marine Serre, who used like a variety of dead stock offcuts. The manufacturing process was really interesting. So if there was one standout brand, I would say have a look at Marine Serre and her process. She even used sustainable fashion advocates as models in her runway as well. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. And is there a difference between, men, women's fashion week, or like, are you seeing more conversations happening, at different shows? Or
it's funny because I guess like what men's and like clothing has been less gendered as time's gone on. So even at Men's Fashion Week, there's a lot of women's looks, and similarly with Women's Fashion Week, which is going to be in a couple of weeks, there'll be lots of men's looks too. And so the transition between styles and stuff has become more sustainable because the clothes are more wearable and more transitional, more seasonless, even though it's still a season calendar. And so elements of sustainability pop up across men's and women's that cross over. But because women consume so much more fashion and buy more fashion, it's way more intense, and there's way more looks on the runway and so on. So I think the main takeaway is trying to get those collections smaller at Women's Fashion Weeks rather than having 150 looks on a runway. Can we do it in 40 or 50 and just try and condense it all?
It's interesting. And so how are you starting to see brands make this transition? Is it brand-led, consumer-led, a mix of both?
I think in the luxury aspect, I think they have realized that their consumer is much more educated and passionate about the things that they buy because they want to make them last a long time, and there's a high craft element involved. But in terms of like the fast fashion business models, I still think it's very much so our consumers love purchasing loads of clothes, and so we're going to cater to that until their voice comes loud enough that we can't ignore them. And so I spoke to ASOS about a year ago about how much onus do you put on sustainable fashion and what the consumers want, and they were very much like, you know what, we are still doing really well, doing what we've always done, and so until the crowd shouts loud enough that it becomes annoying, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. And I think ASOS and companies of that nature and size are big enough to say, build it and they will come. And so they should be making more sustainable fashion and taking on more of that responsibility, because they'll always be fine because their consumers love the product. And so whether the product is cotton or organic cotton, polyester or recycled polyester, as long as they keep making the stuff that their consumer likes design-wise, the material is almost irrelevant to their consumer. And so taking on that responsibility and doing and being more responsible in sustainability practices, I think can only benefit their business, which is like, it really wound me up when they said like, oh, it's on the consumer.
Yeah, it's a bit disheartening, to say the least. But like for consumers, I guess, what are some things that, like you've talked about recycled polyester, organic cotton, like what are some things that we can look out for as consumers to say, hey, I'm going to buy this, and how are there ways where you can do this where it's also cost effective?
Sure. Yeah. I think since the whole pandemic, when we were consuming stuff online, it was a bit more difficult. Whereas now we can go into store. I really like feeling clothes, turning them inside out, looking at the hems and the threads and seeing if you could pull it in and it'll fall apart. But just looking at labels, I think it's just such a rudimentary step that we all should look at the label and see the composition. But I think consumers also just want to know stuff now. Like, I think we love looking at items and we love seeing beautiful designs and things that we would wear, but I think we just want to know more about it now. And I think that's helped with the likes of Love Island moving away from fast fashion sponsors, more documentaries like Zac Efron's Netflix show just about the planet in general. So I think just the transparency part, just tell us where it's from and who made it. And that's a really good starting point.
Is there anything that can be depicted by where it's from? Like, so countries that are, are you seeing there be more ethical practices in specific countries, or not so much yet? It's really just about.
I really like buying British brands. So like for me, like supporting the British manufacturing industry is really key. I know that's heavy handed wearing something Gucci that is secondhand. But I think that the label of made in England will come at a higher price point because there's more stringent laws around manufacturing in the UK using British mills and all of that sort of stuff. If you see labels like made in Bangladesh, made in Myanmar, for me, and I think most people, it's so far away from where we live and shop and stuff. It's kind of like we don't know anything about it and we don't know much about the factory. We can't really trace it there as well. It would be very hard to find a fast fashion item and put it to a person that made it. Whereas I think in England, there's brands like Sheep Inc., there's John Smedley and like the knitwear brands that do really well. Yes, it's a much higher ticket item, but I can find the person that made that. And there's all of the repair system. So like I can take it back to John Smedley, they'll fix a mock hole or they'll repair it, the threads and all of that sort of stuff. So I think if you're looking at faraway countries and places, just have a little Google at companies are pulling out of factories in that part of the world because they can't guarantee there's no slave labor going on. Yeah. And they can't guarantee that those factory owners are paying the workers a living wage. Yeah. And so trying to find something that you can have more of a guarantee that people were looked after well in the manufacturing and supply chain, I think that's more heartening and more warming as a product and something that you're more likely to take care of and last longer.
Awesome. Well, now I'm going to make a switch from fast fashion and fashion in general to electric vehicles, which is something else that you and your brother have been quite involved in as well. Yeah. So how did you get into EVs?
EVs came about from going to fashion shows and events and stuff. There was always an automotive sponsor, and I always found the weird position of I'd be going to speak at a sustainable fashion event and be driven there in an ICE internal combustion engine car. And I was like, I really like the holistic picture of being more sustainable and finding parts on the spectrum and on your journey that you can win. And cars for me was something I was always passionate about. My dad worked at Toyota all his career and Rolls-Royce. So I was always interested in cars. And so when electric vehicles became more prominent in the UK, I knew straight away it was something that I wanted to get involved in and try and find like the wins in that world, but to communicate to other people as well.
So what are some of the most interesting innovations that you've seen in, either EVs or fashion that, you think are going to catch on?
Okay. I'll start with fashion first because there's one that I absolutely love talking about. Weirdly, it was Paris Fashion Week a couple of seasons ago, and the car sponsor DS had partnered with a company called Post Carbon Lab and a fashion brand called Egon Lab. And the Post Carbon Lab team had designed a living fabric. So like they'd grown an organism in a petri dish, basically, that emits carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and managed to weave that into a garment. And so basically you walk around knowing you're taking CO2 out of the atmosphere because of the clothes that you're wearing, which
really
was
cool.
Insane. So that's like one of my favorite.
Was it visible? Like,
it's kind of like an off color within the fabric. So it's like kind of green, but like to treat it as well, they say, because it's living and it needs like
so it's
same
still
things
alive.
as a plant. Yeah. Like, so said to clean it or like to keep it fresh, have like when you had taken a shower, just hang it in your shower and let the steam like clean it and cleanse it and stuff like that.
Wow.
And it will help it grow.
So it continues to grow.
It continues to grow and take out CO2 from the atmosphere as you are walking around cities.
Oh, but it doesn't.
Cool.
The fabric doesn't actually.
The fabric's amazing.
I'm imagining something like Scott's walking
cotton.
around and now is like
it's growing. No, I had the trench coat and it had like a slogan on it that was like a sustainable fashion slogan as well. But yeah, it was super cool. So like it was nice that the car sponsor had like.
I'm really sad you didn't bring that trench coat here
it's
today.
So cool. But good that the car manufacturer had seen that innovation and wanted to like help them implement that as well. But going back to cars, I think one thing that crosses over both industries a lot is supply chain and traceability of elements that are in the clothes. And so I think blockchain is going to be a really key aspect of knowing where things came from. And so things like we don't know where the cotton comes from in some of our clothes. Similarly, with the cobalt in the batteries for electric vehicles, there's some really shady stuff going on in third world countries that we just don't know how they're extracting these elements.
Yeah.
And we don't know if people are being paid for that extraction. If there's just a lot we don't know. And I think blockchain can help with a self-executing contract that knows that when that is bought and purchased and every element of the supply chain is self-executed, so we can guarantee that that person is getting paid for this thing that's now happening in our cars in England and America and stuff. So I think that will be a really interesting development. But then also as second-hand electric cars now start entering the market as well, the amount of people that are going to have more access to an electric vehicle and don't have to spend £45,000 on a new electric car, I think will help the transition massively.
Awesome. And we were talking a little bit about Tesla. What are some things that you think, where's Tesla going wrong? Or what are some things that you think Tesla should look to incorporate a bit?
I think it's really funny looking at Tesla as this really high-tech company that does so many things that associate with Elon Musk. But at the heart of it, it's just like looking after people.
Yeah.
And so when you look at like their ESG stuff, and it's probably like this time, like May or something last year, when Time Magazine and Forbes did their articles on them dropping off the S&P index for ESG, you look at the things and you think, right, these are capable of building things that are incredibly innovative at the complete disrespect for people and company culture. And so I think you can dive into all of the issues around the lack of a carbon plan and all of that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, it's looking after the people that are making these amazing products. And so when things happen in head office that are racially insensitive, or they're not being paid well, or they're just letting go on an email saying you no longer work here, I think that ties into governance of people and acting responsibly as a business, let alone all the amazing stuff that they do technologically wise. I think just looking after people is a complete fundamental of a business. And I think that's where it's lost a lot of people and following.
So, Scott, you talked a little bit about blockchain, but I'm going to go back there. I have, I've had some conversations with friends, and they were talking about being able to start to scan clothing and see exactly where it was made, produced, etc. Are you starting to see this as well?
Yeah, there's a really interesting company called Sheep Inc., and they have a tiny little barcode on the inside of the sweater that you scan and you get assigned a sheep to like per jumper and per item that you have, which I think is really interesting to put the brain back on nature and not on an item of clothing. But along that, you can see like the item goes from farm to store within like 50 miles or so. You can see each element of the supply chain, and it also makes you feel okay spending the money for that item because you can see all of these people have been paid a fair wage and a good wage, and you're happy to pay the profit margin because you know all about the business.
That is
And so
cool.
yeah, I've got like 5 sheep roaming around somewhere, all called like funny names.
Because of the clothes that you own.
Yeah. So like I've got a scarf, so I've got assigned a sheep for that scarf. I've got a V-neck sweater, so I've got a sheep assigned for that sweater.
Can you go back to the same sheep, or do you?
You can track. Yeah, you get an app and you see like
cool.
what farm they're on and what they're doing and stuff.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. And so does Sheep Inc. actually make the clothes as well, or?
Yeah. So they extract all the yarn and the wools and stuff and everything, and then manufacture the product. Give you full transparency on their website of where it comes from and all of that. And it's almost like reassuring that you know where that garment has come from. There's another one called Ask It as well. I don't think they've incorporated blockchain yet, but I think it would be a really good use case for them because they are one of the most transparent companies. And so even on their website, they'll do 3 colors of a polo shirt. This is actually from Ask It as well. And they'll do like 5 colors, and then there won't be a gray or there won't be a green. And it's because they can't find a responsible way to make it in that color or dye it that color. And so they just says, we're not going to do it until we can find a better way to do it.
Wow.
But you get your receipt when you pay, but then you also get a receipt of this person made it. It cost this for us to buy the threads. It costs us this to manufacture it. It costs us this to dye it. This is our profit margin. You pay this.
So with blockchain, I think most people, I mean, even including myself, will immediately, their minds will go to cryptocurrency. Is there a currency involved with blockchain, or how does that work? How do brands build blockchain into their supply chain?
There's a really interesting use case to be said for blockchain and a currency, because you can use a blockchain without having a currency as well. And it doesn't need to be something that's listed on an exchange that the price fluctuates, but you can make a token that is just for your environment and your ecosystem. But fundamentally, it's the transparency that plays into the use of that blockchain.
Great. So it's easy, you think, for large brands to start to adopt or build blockchain into their current?
Yeah, I think it could be very easy. The only thing that's probably scaring people away are the laws around it, because it's very low governed at the minute. Like the governance levels aren't quite where they need to be for someone like Nike to take this on. However, in electric vehicles, companies like Volvo, who own Polestar, have sites where they're developing blockchain systems to trace things like that.
What lessons can big brands learn from the likes of Sheep Inc.?
I think the main thing that smaller companies do really well is think locally about the community, about their manufacturing and all of that sort of stuff. So brands like Nike that manufacturing all over like completely different parts of the world, I think if they can look at that ecosystem and look at their impact in that community and think about how they can do that more responsibly, I think it will be a brilliant thing to communicate to a consumer as well. One thing, Superdry, I mean, as much as their comms, I think they've announced that they're going to be the most sustainable fashion brand by 2030, which is the most blanket term I've heard. But they did something working with their farm. So a lot of their product offering is cotton. And so they've looked at their cotton farms and gone, right, we're going to invest in you, in the manufacturing tools, in your equipment, in your farm, in your pesticide use, and all of these things to transition you to an organic cotton farm instead of a cotton farm. And so things like that are really expensive for a farmer to do. But that's also a replacement product as well. They've not just gone, okay, here's our cotton t-shirts and here's our organic cotton t-shirts. They've just gone, swap them like for like. So it's not an addition onto their product too. But I think that local touch to, or the local approach to such a huge brand is fundamental in helping people transition.
Yeah. So think local, think less.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
Different from what happened with the Kardashians and Boohoo.
Yeah.
Which we were talking about earlier, where what happened exactly?
Yeah, so like one of the Kardashians was announced as their sustainability ambassador, and instead of looking at the business holistically, they've just gone, what collection can we make that is an addition onto the product offering? And so they had, I think Boohoo, Shein were one of the biggest, but Boohoo also lists something like 500 new items a day onto their website.
It's crazy.
And they've just gone, right, and now we've got our sustainability line on top of that, instead of let's reduce this off the bottom somewhere and replace it with our sustainability line. So it just became more product.
Nuts. And I guess with that, what are some, because influencers today play such a big role in not only like raising awareness, but educating consumers on things like sustainability. What are some of the, I guess, things that you do when brands approach you?
Yeah, it's really difficult for me because I love fashion. And I love clothes.
Yeah.
And so like doing all the fashion week circuit and seeing all these new collections and trying to communicate that in an authentic way.
Too, because sometimes it's like you meet these people and they're so great. You're like, how could this
they're
brand
amazing.
be so bad?
That's really funny. But I think on the influencer piece, I won't work with like affiliate links because I don't really like making money from my audience. I think they follow me and support me for different reasons. And I think when it's an education piece, I don't then want to make money just off them for selling them more product. But I think influencers and social media, it's become so easy to consume more stuff because you don't even have to leave the app anymore. You can just do it, click it all in app and buy it straight away.
Love that feature.
Yeah.
It gets me every night.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's just so easy to scroll. But for me, when a brand reaches out, I'll ask them what they can send me. Like, send me your, sustainability report. Tell me things that you've changed in the last couple of years that are a good thing for me to communicate. And I always try and send, if I do have to use a link, I try and send them to a page that is an about page or a learn more page or a discover us page rather than straight to the e-commerce website where they're just looking at products. Doesn't always happen like that, but recently at Paris Fashion Week, one of the brands that reached out was Canada Goose.
Wow.
And I think a lot of people still associate them with fur and protesters outside their stores. And so I was very like, this is going to be a big red flag. And they sent us the stuff and I was like blown away.
Really?
I couldn't believe it. They don't use fur anymore. All of the down in their jackets is a byproduct from the meat industry and is using their responsibly sourced systems, their RDS, which is loads of brands use this program. The cotton and the polyester is recycled cotton or recycled polyester.
Wow.
And you can now rent one. So they've gone, right, we make a £1,000 product, but if you're going away skiing for 4 days, just rent it for 50, 60 quid instead. Don't buy a £1,200 jacket when you can rent it for 4 days and then it sits in your wardrobe for the year.
Yeah.
And so like picking those elements to communicate was an easy sell for me now because then I can give people alternatives to buying product.
Totally. I love the whole renting your wardrobe. I used to do it a lot in the US. I wish it was a bit more prominent here, although it seems like it's starting to pick up.
There's some really good ones that allow you to distinguish what's in your wardrobe, what you wear, what your style is, and then rent those items out, but also like swaps as well. So there's like buy rotation, there's Retaro, there's Her that are powered in Selfridges. So Her Collective do all of Selfridges as rentals. But now it's like, hopefully it will get into menswear space a little bit more as well.
I guess just to wrap us up for today, can you just leave us with, I guess, some things that, our listeners can, take on from this podcast? What can they do to start to incorporate sustainability?
Fast fashion do a really good job of complicating things. They make it so overwhelming and so daunting that people are scared from it. But I think we would rather live in a world where everyone is doing something than someone doing everything. So kind of like look at your life, look at the things that you do the most of and pick ways that you can improve those and just go hard for them.
Thank you so much for joining us, Scott. It's been really fun getting to chat with you and meet you in person for the first time.
Finally, yeah.
And thank you to everybody that's listening in today. And we will be with you soon.
You don't have to be rich to change the world.
I think we can have a big impact. I think it's really important